and another gun actually folds. So it heads up to a flop of a 995 with 2 diamonds. No, I'm not joking. I just flop quads.
Hey YouTube.
G'day again everyone, welcome back to the vlog. The following is from my Saturday evening session up in Sydney at the Star Casino. Ended up sleeping in pretty late after the previous night's session, woke up at 4pm and then didn't have much time to do anything except for cook a decent feed and then head off to the casino. Got into the game straight away at 6 o'clock, and fortunately for the entire duration of all the hands we were playing a 2-5-10 game and we played some crazy action hands. So let's not waste any more time and start getting into the hands. First hand of the session, the action folds to my cutoff with ace-jack offsuit. I go ahead and open it up to 25 and then get called by an unknown straddle. So it heads up to a flop of a 7-7-3 rainbow. The opponent checks it over to me and I could go either way with checking or betting. In game, I did decide to bet, and basically it's just to try and deny equity to hands like Queen 10, since any two cards are going to be very live against their ace high. Potentially could get called by worse hands as well. So I go ahead and make it 20 and then the straddle calls. So it still heads up to a turn, which is the 2 of clubs. When the opponent checks it over to me again, could go ahead and bet just to try and get value from basically backdoor clubs or a hand like 5-4 that's open-ended now. But I think trying to get to showdown value with a hand like this makes all the world of sense, so I check it back. And then we get free river, which is the Queen of Spades, and the opponent goes ahead and bets out 45. Pretty interesting. I do think we have a lot of showdown value with our ace high, and I did want to bet on the flop to try and deny equity to hands like Queen 10, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have to have a queen here when they bet out. They could have floated with a lot of hands that are, ace 2 offsuit, jack 10 offsuit, that they could be turning into a bluff when I show a lot of weakness. My hand's pretty face up at this point, so it would make a lot of sense for them to want to go ahead and bluff, but somewhat concerned they could have a queen as some of those hands they're going to float. I think a 7 might take this line as well. We're getting about 3-1 on a call. We don't have to be that right that often, and I think we're ahead of enough of my opponent's range, considering I think they are making a lot of loose floats on the flop. That's a good spot to call with ace high in my opinion. So I throw in the call, and then the opponent shows King 4 of spades. So absolute airball bluff, and we rake in this first pot with the ace high hero call. Next hand, the action's on an unknown big blind who opens it up to 30. Then I'm in the straddle with Queen 10 offsuit. I think the best play here probably is just to call, but I kind of got a vibe from the opponent that they seems kind of like they had a vulnerable hand. So I thought it might be a good spot to attack that with 3-bet. So I went ahead and made a 90, which isn't necessarily an awful play, but I think my read was wrong because the opponent ends up throwing in the call anyway. So it heads up to a flop of Jack 10-7 with 2 hearts. The opponent checks it over to me, and in this spot with a strongish middle pair here, I think it's a great spot to check back and induce further bets from the opponent. This is a pretty wet board that's pretty high card heavy, so unlike the 7-7-3 where we're going to benefit a lot from c-betting to deny equity, that's less of an issue here, and I would rather check back with a hand like a strong middle pair here, which is what I do. So we still heads up to the turn, which is the 10 of clubs. Turn trips, and things get even better because the big blind leads out for 100. Now the action's on me, and yet again another pretty interesting decision whether we want to raise or just call. The reasons I would like raising here are for value. There's straight draws, there's flushes we can get called by, and maybe Jack X will call the raise. That's the problem though. One of the reasons I like just calling is I could potentially see a tighter opponent hero folding a Jack X if I raise, because it will turn our hand kind of face up. Also, additionally, playing a bit of pot control can make sense here. I think my opponent's going to have a bunch of straights in their range, as well as a few stronger 10x. I think ace-10 offsuit might be a hand they have in their range, so it does make a little bit of sense to play it cautious. Like I said though, I could go either way. In game, I did play a bit cautious and just called. So we get to see the river, which is the 5 of spades, and then the opponent's in the tank, probably a good 45 seconds. Actually, they were in the tank so long, I kind of like wondered if I missed them check for a bit, but I don't think I did because they eventually do check. Now the action's on me, slam dunk values bet here. Interesting sizing decision. Part of me actually considers going all in for about 800, because if my opponent does have a worse 10x that they led with on the turn, I think they might even call an all in. But my issue with using that large of a bet size is my opponent probably will start to hero fold some jacks. And whilst I think they're mostly just going to bet their straights and better trips on the river, if they did mix in a trap here to induce a bluff from like me when I have ace king or something, we don't really want to fall into that trap. So I decide to bet a bit smaller. I go ahead and make it 300. Then the action's on my opponent, and they're in the tank yet again, probably another 30 seconds before throwing in the call. We turn over our queen 10, and then their hand goes straight in the muck. So winning a second pot of the session. Let's go. Next hand, I'm on the button with pocket fives, open it up to 25, and then a loose aggressive straddle 3-bets it to 75. Pretty no-brainer decision to just call. So we go heads up to a flop of queen, queen, deuce, rainbow. The opponent isn't in the take that long, probably like a few seconds before checking it over to me. Now, I think in this spot, I want to go ahead and bet just to deny a bit of equity to my opponent's hands like ace-king offsuit, ace-jack suited. I just think they're going to have a lot of overcards to my 5, which we'd be pretty happy to fold out now. But even if they do make a loose float with some of those overcard hands, we're getting a bit of value, which is nice as well. So I go ahead and bet 65. Not totally in love with my sizing here. If I'm just trying to deny equity, I think I can probably fold out a similar range of hand, betting a bit smaller, like 45 or 50. Whatever the case, I made it 65, and then my opponent throws in the call. So we see a turn, which is the 8 of diamonds putting out backdoor diamonds. The opponent checks it over to me again, and I think in this spot, I kind of do want to bet just to try and keep denying equity to those overcard ace-high hands. Having said that though, if we check now, we can potentially induce bluffs from those hands on the river. I would rather just bet a stronger range of hands on this turn because I'm going to have a lot of queen X in my range and those hands are going to want to use a larger sizing. So I'd probably rather bet something like that and some of my stronger pocket pairs. So I check back the 5s here and we get a free river, which is the 4 of clubs. And then the opponent goes ahead and bets 150. Action's on me here and pretty tempted to call in this spot. Like I said, I think my opponent's going to be floating on the flop with a lot of ace-high hands and could definitely be trying to turn those into a bluff now, figuring I have a hand like I have. It's going to be hard-pressed to call off. Somewhat concerned though, my opponent could potentially play check call with some queens, although I think might be more inclined to bet those, but they still have a bunch of pocket pairs. I could see them checking 9s, 10s, maybe even kings or aces on the flop. So I decide to throw in the call here, and then my opponent shows ace-queen offsuit. So my read that they will bet trips on the flop wasn't correct, and they got us in this one. Next up, a passive player limps the cutoff, and then I'm in the big blind with 5-3 offsuit. And as hilarious as I think it would be for me to just dump money in this game by raising this hand, I'm not feeling that generous tonight, so I just check it, and then we get to see a flop, which is king, queen, 8 with 2 hearts. I check it over to the opponent, pretty much just giving up at this point, but then they check back, so we do get a free turn, which is the 2 of clubs. Doesn't really improve us. I really do think my opponent, if they had a strong king, or maybe any one-pair type hand, I think they'd be pretty inclined to bet it on the flop to try and deny equity to a flush draw or something like that. So I kind of just want to steal, just be a bit opportunistic and notice that they probably do have a weaker hand, which is definitely going to be ahead of our 5-high. So I decide to attack it. I go ahead and bet 20, and then the cutoff throws in the call. So we heads up to the river, which is the 4 of diamonds. So yeah, we actually have the nut low hand here with 5-high. So I want to bluff for that reason, but also I actually think this is a really good spot to bluff. Both the backdoor flush and the front door flush missed. So if my opponent, has like 10 high hearts, they're just going to snap fold when I bet. And we really want to capitalize on a fold equity when we have the nut low hand. So I go ahead and bet 50. And then my opponent hits the tank, which is not what we wanted to see. We wanted to snap fold, but I could potentially see them folding like a queen or an 8, maybe even a deuce. So really just hoping they fold, and they're in the tank probably like 20-30 seconds before throwing in the call. I turn over my 5-3, and then they show us queen 10. So got us on that hand. GG to the villain. Next hand, passive player limps under the gun. Then I'm on the button with pocket 9s. I ISO raise it to 50. I get a call from a passive small blind, and another gun actually folds. So it heads up to a flop of 9-9-5 with 2 diamonds. No, I'm not joking. I just flop quads. Okay. So the small blind checks it over to me, and I think the best player here probably is just to go ahead and bet when the opponent cold calls a large raise out of position. I think they're going to have a lot of pocket pairs in their range, and we really want to bet to get value from them now. Like if they have pocket eights, they might call on this flop, but if the turn's an ace or a king or a queen, they might be more reluctant to put money in. So I think the best play probably is just to go ahead and bet here. I decided to check it back. It's a bit of that old school mentality, like we're so far ahead, we block my opponent having trips, we should just let them catch up and get something. I think it's a bit flawed though. I think we're probably going to make more EV by just betting with a hand this strong. I checked it though, and then we get a free turn, which is the 4 of diamonds, putting in the front door flush. And then the opponent checks it over to me. Really was hoping they would have a flush or start bluffing or something, but the action's on me and I just have to go ahead and start to try and build a pot now. I think if my opponent has any single pair with a diamond, they probably will call. Plus they could have the nut flush draw in their range as well, so we want to go ahead and try and get a bit of value. I bet 60, and then my opponent calls pretty quickly, so hey, we flop quads and we're getting action, I cannot complain. So we're off to the river, which is the 4 of spades pairing the 4. Then the opponent decides to leap out for 140. Wow, happy days so far. Interesting decision how large we want to raise here. I actually take going all in or raising really large off the table. I think it's pretty likely my opponent has a 4x hand or a bluff, and I don't think those hands are ever going to call an all in when I could so obviously have a 9. Take that option off the table, and it's pretty interesting what size I do want to use. I actually consider min clicking here just to enable my opponent to potentially 3-bet bluff if they're bluffing with like the naked ace of diamonds. But I think I might be missing a bit of EV there. I think my opponent being passive, if they call pre-flop with like ace-4 offsuit or 5-4 suited, they're probably not the type that's going to want to fold a full house on the river. So I decide to go a bit bigger, try and get a bit more value. I raise it up to 420, and then the opponent is in the tank, probably a good 30 seconds before sighing, and throw it in the call. Let's go. We actually won a massive pot with quads here. I turn over my 9s, and then my opponent marks and doesn't show us what they have, but hey, I flop quads, and I managed to get value. That's how you know it's a good day. Next hand, I'm on the button with king 2 of diamonds. I raise it up to 25, and then a tight aggressive small blind 3-bets it to 65. The action gets back to me, and pretty interesting spot here. King 2 suited is going to be one of the worst hands I'm opening on the button. So usually I would just fold it to a normal size 3-bet, but therein lies the problem. My opponent 3-bet really small, especially considering we're over 150 straddles effective. So getting a price this good to play a plot in position when we're deep stacked against a range of hands that I do think is really strong, but also kind of like face up and strong, I think it's a good spot to throw in the call, which is what I do. So it heads up to a flop of 9-8-5 rainbow, and then the opponent's in the tank probably like 5 to 10 seconds before checking it over to me. Now I think this is a pretty interesting spot whether we want to start bluffing at this board or not. On one hand, I really do want to go ahead and bluff here just because I'm going to have so many strong hands on this board. I'm pretty much continuing with my entire range that opens the button when my opponent 3-bets this small, so I'm definitely going to have all of the straights, probably some of the offsuit straights to be honest, a bunch of 2 pairs as well, all the sets. So I think it's a good spot to stab at it for that reason. The only problem is because my range is so wide, if we do bluff with, every king 2 suited, king 3 suited, king 4 suited, and my opponent's planning to play check call all the way with an overpair, they're kind of crushing us in this spot. So yeah, pretty interesting decision. It's a Saturday night though, and I flew all the way to Sydney. Checking's boring. I decide to bluff at it. I go ahead and bet 75, and then my opponent throws in the call pretty quickly. So it heads up to a turn still, which is the 7 of spades, completing the 4-card rainbow, also putting out a 4-liner to a 6. Then the opponent checks it over to me again, and I think my plan on the flop was to keep barreling at it if we got a turn that's going to be really good for our range. And this turn is beautiful for our range. Our opponent, being that they're a tight aggressive player who 3-bet, pretty much never have a 6, and this is a great spot to put on the pressure. Even if my opponent was planning to check call all the way with aces, like, I think we can blow them off it by playing this hand really aggressive. So I decide to keep bluffing. I go ahead and bet 150, which honestly could go a bit larger with the sizing just to put those overpairs in a really tough spot. But I will say that if my opponent does call with some of those, and the only hands they're folding are like ace king and ace queen, we're getting a cheaper price to bluff them off those hands, so that's kind of better. But I go ahead and bet 150, and then my opponent is in the tank, maybe like 10 seconds before throwing in the call. It's not what we wanted to see. We're going to have to see if we can put more pressure on the river. And we see a river, which is the three of spades. Absolutely no help to us at all. The opponent checks it over to us again, and we're on the river with king high, and our opponent, like, pretty obviously has an overpair. Do we think they'll fold it or not? I honestly think they do if I use a really large bet sizing. This is a tight opponent, and I think they're going to be scared to put a lot of money in with just one pair, when they're going to know I have a lot of straights in my range, not only any 6, but also Jack 10 suited, maybe Jack 10 offsuit. I go ahead and bet 666, and then my opponent hits the tank, and they're in the tank probably a good minute or so. They're like kind of like moaning and groaning to themselves. I can't really make way out what they're saying. I'm just trying to keep my poker face steady because this is a really large overbet bluff. My opponent very obviously has an overpair, and they're not snap folding it, so that's not good news. But they're in the tank a good minute, and in my head I'm just like, I said the tank lasted a minute, maybe it was only 15 seconds and it felt like a minute, but I keep switching from, oh, they're definitely going to fold, oh, damn it, they're definitely going to call. It's just an absolute roller coaster, but I'm just trying to keep my poker face. And then my opponent just like coils back and throws their cards in the muck. Let's go. We get the overbet bluff through. Absolutely positive. My opponent folded an overpair. Happy days for me. Next up, a loose aggressive cutoff opens it to 25, and the action's round to my small blind with king queen of clubs, slam dunk 3-bet spot. The thing that makes the dynamics in this hand a bit different is the opponent had been playing very loose aggressive, and they'd ran up a stack at this point, so playing over 2,000 effective, and all that means is I want to use the larger 3-bet sizing just to disincentivize calls from my opponents when I do have the part of my range that's going to benefit from folds. Don't necessarily want folds with king queen suited, but have to treat all of our range with the same sizing pre-flop. So I go ahead and raise it up to 125, which is bigger than I would do at 100 straddles effective. And then my opponent throws in the call. So it heads up to a flop of Jack 10-7 rainbow with one club. Definitely want to go ahead and c-bet here. I'm going to have a lot of strong hands on this board. I'm going to have all the overpairs. I'm going to have pretty much all of the sets, the occasional straight and Jack 10 suited as well. So I want to balance that strong range out with some bluffs, and this is pretty much the highest equity bluff we're going to have with the open ender and the backdoor flush. So I go ahead and bet 100, and the action's on the opponent. And they don't think too long before raising it up to 300. Action's back on me here, and pretty concerned by this raise. My opponent can very easily have any hand that's 2-pair or stronger than that. But being that this is a loose aggressive opponent, I think they're going to have a lot of bluffs in their range as well, particularly on this board. They're really going to try and put the screws to me since I'm going to have a lot of overpairs in this hand. It's literally like the last hand where I bluff my opponent off of an overpair. This is a great spot for them to try and bluff me off an overpair. It's funny how things come full circle, but I'm going to throw in the call here because we have so much equity with our open-ended straight draw, backdoor flush, and if my opponent has 2-pair or a set, I think the chances we stack them, being how loose aggressive they are, is pretty likely. So I throw in the call, and then we heads up to the turn, which is the 9 of diamonds. Let's go. We make the nuts on the turn. I still check it over to the opponent, hopefully to induce some bluffs or some value bets from worse hands. And they oblige. They go ahead and bet 425. Let's go. Action's back on me, and my initial thought is let's check raise it. Let's try and stack my opponent when they have a worse straight or when they have an 8 themselves. But I actually think that's a mistake, and I think that's a mistake because this is a very aggressive opponent, and I actually think that they're going to be trying to bluff me a lot going forward. 6-5 suited, Queen 9 suited is another pretty obvious bluffing hand that they could have, so I really just want to keep giving them rope to bluff me off, and it's kind of like in the previous hand that I played where I just knew my opponent had a lot of overpairs in their range, because I feel like that opponent probably would have tried to raise me earlier if they had a hand stronger than an overpair. So if I keep my calling down range strong by protecting it with some traps, I'm not just always, hands in the air on the river with an overpair. Like, what do? I definitely think it's a good spot to just call, to keep inducing bluffs from my opponent, keep my calling range strong, and I know it's a 4-liner to a straight, but I really think an opponent this loose aggressive might keep value betting a set because it's going to look so obvious that I have an overpair that they feel like it's not too thin to do that. So I really think the chances that we stack the opponent is pretty high. Being out of position definitely does suck. I think it'd be a slam dunk slow play in position, but out of position, maybe we should raise for that reason. I still think it's a good spot to trap though, so I throw in the call and we're heads up to the river, which is the ace of hearts, and I honestly do consider leading on this river. I think my opponent might check back a set. If I check it to them, that might call the all in. But that hand might fold to the all-in anyway. I mean, they've got to put me on pocket aces a lot. So I think the better play still is to check. I think they're still going to go all-in with an 8 to try and stack me if I do have aces. So yeah, I think it's the best play to check it over to the opponent for that reason, which is what I do. I check it over to them, and then the opponent doesn't waste much time before ripping it all in. Pretty easy snap call with the nuts. I throw in the chips, and the opponent shows pocket 5s. So wow, there you go. Pretty big airball bluff by them, and really, really gutsy to end up putting in 200 straddles with a bluff. Like, power to them. I actually really like their play. Like, I probably would have folded a set on the river, but unfortunately for them, we protected our call down range with the nuts, and they walked right into the trap. So we've got one final hand before we wrap this thing up, and it's literally the very next hand to the previous one. Like, I'm still raking in chips as this hand is going on. So the cutoff goes ahead and opens it for 25, and then I'm on the button with pocket 8s. I 3-bet it up to 75, and then the action gets around to a loose aggressive big blind. They go ahead and 4-bet it to 200. The cutoff folds. Now, I do think there is a lot of merit to just folding here, particularly in a live poker game where people don't 4-bet bluff as much. However, this player has been 4-betting all night, and they haven't really made showdown yet, but they can't have it every single time. So if they do have a bunch of ace-5 suited, maybe the odd suited connector in their range, as well as some of the offsuit, ace-queen, ace-jack combinations, I think we're absolutely getting the right price to call and see this pot in position. So that's what I do. I throw in the call, and then we're heads up to a flop of Jack 7-3 with 2 clubs. I have the 8 of clubs, and the opponent goes ahead and c-bets 200. Interesting decision. I think, though, the logic I had pre-flop kind of carries over to here too. If they are just c-betting with all their offsuit ace-x hands and some suited connectors that, like 10-9 suited has a gut shot, for example, or even ace-5 suited, they might just be stabbing at it just cause. I think we're still going to be ahead of that range enough to throw in the call here. Having said that, though, I wouldn't actually fault anyone for folding. You're going to be a big dog to a range that's like all of the overpairs, and the occasional ace king and ace queen, which some people will play that strategy when they see about this flop. But I think this opponent's a bit more loose aggressive, and it's a good spot to call. So that's what I do. I throw it in, and then we're heads up to a turn, which is the 10 of spades putting out backdoor spades, and the opponent pretty much snap rips it all in, straight away. Card hits the felt, they're all in, and I usually don't get into live tells that much on the vlog, mostly because I'm not great at understanding them. But when someone rips it all in like this, I've seen it before, and I think it could mean 2 things. I think it could mean that they have a vulnerable overpair, so probably not pocket aces. I think they might think and then shove or check that. But if they have pocket kings or pocket queens, they might just be glad that the front door flush didn't get in and there's no overcard to their overpair, so they're just ripping it all in to just try and get me off of any hand that has equity against them. So pocket kings, pocket queens definitely in their range, but I also think it can mean that they turned a draw and they're just sort of excited that they hit their draw and they really want to semi-bluff. Because there's backdoor spades, I think they could have ace-4 of spades, ace-5 of spades, maybe the odd ace-9 of spades. King-queen suited as well actually makes a lot of sense, and since that's the range of hands I put them on, we actually have the right equity to call with a hand like pocket 8s. I know a lot of those hands are really live to us. I actually put it in Equilab, as you can see here, the range of hands. I put my opponent on, I gave him a few flushes as well, kings and queens, and if my read's correct, and this is their range, we have 35.81 equity with our pocket 8s here, and being that we're getting 2.4 to 1 on a call, we only need to be good 29% of the time, so there's actually going to be a lot of EV we're making with a call here if my assumption about their range is correct. So with all of that in mind, I do throw in the call, and then my opponent shows me pocket queens. It's not what we wanted to see, but we do still have a few outs to either hit a straight or a set. So we get to see a river, which is the Jack of Spades. Damn, the opponent's going to get us on this one, and that's poker sometimes. You win a big one, then you lose a big one. So there you go, those were the most interesting hands I played across this session. There was definitely plenty of crazy ones, but how do I feel about my play over these crazy hands? I'm going to do it, I'm going with an A grade today. I was absolutely stoked with my performance this session. Not only did I get in early, have a good rest the night before and ate well, but when I showed up, I felt like I was completely focused. I was paying attention to all of the hands, even the ones I wasn't in, to try and pick up on opponents' tendencies. And then when I eventually did play hands with them, it absolutely paid off. That massive pot that I won with the King Queen suited, I would have not won that much if I didn't figure out that was a really good spot to slow play against this opponent specifically, because they were willing to go for it in spots where, you know, the board was the run out was bad for the opponent. They were not scared to put money in, and if I didn't notice that they were that loose aggressive, I wouldn't have protected my range, and, you know, I just would have raised on the turn and ended up having them fold just there and lost the extra, you know, over 1,000. So stoked with my performance, really paying attention, keying in. Looked for good spots to run bluffs, which worked and didn't work to varying degrees, but glad that I was in it, paying attention. Played well relative to my opponent's strategies. I feel like if I played this well every single time I played live poker, I would just absolutely be killing stuff. So over the moon with this performance. I feel like I earned the A grade. Absolutely over the moon with my performance in this session in terms of how I played, but in terms of results, it's more good news because I bought into the game for 1,000, only needed to buy in the one time, and ended up running it up to 3,083. So over a 2k win on a Saturday night. Definitely not too bad for one night's work. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you for sticking all the way to the end of the vlog. That really helps my channel's analytics and I do appreciate it. If you haven't already, hop in the comments below. Let me know what you think about how I play these individual hand histories. I felt good about my play, but I definitely do think I made some mistakes and I definitely deserve to be called out for them. So hop in the comments, let me know. For now, I'm out of here. Peace.